Well, what a surprise. It turns out that the hundreds of billions of dollars that American politicians allegedly sent to Kyiv have mysteriously disappeared. Zelensky seems to be just as shocked. Where the money went is anyone's guess, but it's definitely not with him. According to official reports, Ukraine has received $177 billion from the West since the conflict began. But if we are to believe Zelensky, only $75 billion has actually made it into Kyiv's coffers. The difference, to put it mildly, is substantial. And now, the Ukrainian leader has one big problem. How to explain where those $100 billion have gone? When they say that Ukraine received $200 billion to support the army? That's not true. I don't know where all that money is, he complained in an interview. Oh, really? And who knows? The U.S. State Department, apparently, is also scratching its head over this issue, as it has decided to suspend any material aid to other countries for 3 months. Coincidence? We don't think so. Meanwhile, Vladimir Putin seems to be keeping a close eye on the situation. He even noted that if Donald Trump returns to the White House, he will quickly restore order in Europe. According to him, all this political riffraff will immediately fall into line and do as they're told. But for now, the big question remains: where have those $100 billion gone? Maybe they're stashed in someone's offshore accounts? Or buried deep within the Ukrainian bureaucracy? But it seems no one is really interested in looking for them. The main thing is to put on a shocked face and say, "I don't know where all this money went." Just imagine. Only yesterday, Kyiv was eagerly awaiting another billion-dollar tranche from Washington. And today, bam, the money's all gone. Not gradually, not slowly, but as if cut off with a knife. That's it. Financial oxygen has been shut off. For the first time in many years, America simply turned around and left without saying a word. And now, with the new Trump administration signaling a complete overhaul of foreign policy, the question hangs in the air. Is this the beginning of the end for the entire Ukrainian military campaign? Like a bolt from the blue, Kyiv announced that American money is no longer flowing like a river. Absolutely no one was prepared for this. In the middle of the night, they woke up Vladimir Zelensky with the alarming news. Key programs funded by the US have been halted. No negotiations, no warnings. The switch was just flipped off. Naturally, panic immediately broke out in the Ukrainian leadership. The numbers no longer added up, and the budgets were bursting at the seams. At first, no one could believe it. How could this happen? America, the main and only truly powerful ally, suddenly says, "Sorry, but the shop's closed." But it turns out it wasn't a mistake. It's the new reality. Just a few hours later, Zelensky was desperately trying to grasp the scale of the disaster. Programs fully dependent on American money began shutting down one by one. The president of Ukraine urgently reached out to the people on social media, carefully choosing his words, but even his face showed. The situation was catastrophic. Critically important programs have been suspended while the US reassesses its policy, he reported. Of course, attempts to plug the holes started right away. Zelensky announced that Ukraine would try to fund some programs from domestic reserves. Yeah, what reserves? And would also ask Europe to help fill the gaps. But here's the catch. Europe has been pretending for years that this doesn't concern them, and that's putting it mildly. Now here's the interesting part. Washington made it crystal clear. Funding is suspended for at least 90 days. The Trump administration is reviewing all foreign aid to align it with the America First principle. When Trump was asked about this decision, he, as usual, didn't beat around the bush. "We need to put America first," he declared without a hint of doubt. Ukraine is in a tough spot, but we've already given them almost $300 billion. And you know how much Europe has given? A tiny portion. Just a tiny bit. And they don't even have an ocean between them. It should be more important to them, but they simply won't take responsibility. No apologies, no pangs of conscience. Just a tough, uncompromising stance. So, what now? Ukraine is left to face its problems alone while Europe, as always, pretends nothing is happening. It's hard to believe, but Washington suddenly decided to think, where exactly is all this money endlessly sent to Kyiv going? And miraculously, it turned out that not all of it makes any sense to the US. After all, they plan to scrutinize every penny spent. Trump himself promised a few months ago, "I will end this conflict." And now it seems he's getting to work. According to him, Biden and Kamala Harris dragged the US into this chaos but couldn't find a way out. But he apparently can. So maybe this sudden financial stop is just his first step toward negotiations with Putin. For Zelensky, the situation is worse than he could have imagined in his worst nightmares. Now the key question, is this a temporary check or a fundamental shift in all of American policy? And it seems like it's heading toward the second option. The consequences are already being felt all over Ukraine. Energy projects are frozen, plans to strengthen cities against missile strikes have been shelved, veteran assistance is suspended. Kyiv is urgently revising its budgets and scrambling to find new sources of money. The first steps in this direction have already been taken. Europe, of course, isn't exactly eager to compensate for American aid, but they've managed to squeeze out a little. For instance, Finland allocated 198 million euros, and Sweden sent its largest aid package, an entire $1.23 billion. Zelensky immediately expressed his endless gratitude, reminding the world of how difficult things are for his country right now. But even he knows the situation is dire. In one statement, he admitted, "We are facing critical problems in healthcare and cybersecurity, and we need to urgently ramp up our efforts." However, the main source of concern remains the US. Zelensky cautiously acknowledged that America is reassessing its policy, but added, "We must do everything we can to ensure that our people do not suffer from these changes." The contrast between Biden and Trump couldn't be more obvious. Under Biden, money flowed like a river, with no significant checks. Ukraine was receiving tens of billions of dollars for military operations, infrastructure, and government programs. For the White House, supporting Kyiv was not just important, it was sacred. With Trump's arrival, everything changes abruptly. There's no more automatic aid. Now every dollar undergoes a rigorous check. And the message to Ukraine is crystal clear. If Europe wants Ukraine to remain the shield against Russia, it better start paying up itself. What does this mean in practice? Very simple. If the flow of American money dries up completely, Kyiv will have to rethink its strategy. Either scale back military operations or, what once seemed unimaginable, begin real diplomatic negotiations for a ceasefire. And now, it seems, the end of the era of limitless funding for Ukraine from the US is just around the corner. It's clear that Washington is no longer willing to endlessly sponsor this conflict, and that means Kyiv must face the harsh reality. Donald Trump, being a highly pragmatic person, decided not to throw around gifts and demanded guarantees. In simple terms, weapons in exchange for rare earth metals, lithium, titanium, everything without which modern industry would come to a halt. According to the US Senate's estimates, such a deal could be worth up to $1 trillion. But Zelensky wasn't idle. He offered these resources not only to Trump, but also to Biden's administration. Here, of course, an interesting question arises. Who even controls these resources now? Because, to put it mildly, Ukraine's territory has shrunk somewhat since 2022. Many of the valuable minerals that were once under Kyiv's control are now firmly in Russia's. However, the real intrigue lies elsewhere. Rumor has it that Ukraine's rare earth metal deposits bring profits not only to Ukraine, but also to some very specific Western entities. And among them, quite coincidentally, are companies linked to... guess who? Yes, the Biden family. So the resources in exchange for weapons deal was, from the very beginning, quite ambiguous. But it gets even more interesting. On American television, Zelensky suddenly declares that a significant portion of these rare earth metals he promises to Washington is located in territories not under Kyiv's control, that is, in those very areas now controlled by Russia. Brilliant. So what was this? Was Zelensky trying to motivate the US to provide new military support? Like, here are your titanium mines, we're ready to fight for them, just give us more weapons? Possibly. But here's the problem. Judging by the mood in Washington, no one has had any faith in the success of the Ukrainian armed forces for quite some time. Even the Biden administration, which for years has been feeding everyone talks of victory, seemingly stopped believing in Ukraine returning to the 1991 borders long ago. They just preferred to stay silent. Trump, however, unlike his predecessors, isn't shy about speaking out. He wants not promises, but real resources. And now, the key question: if American military billions are no longer flowing like a river, and Ukraine's resources are ending up in the hands of those who weren't supposed to get them, what comes next? For Russia, this change is a real gift. Ukraine, weakened by financial uncertainty, could face massive difficulties. The less money, the harder it becomes to repel attacks and sustain long-term military operations. If Europe doesn't take on the commitments that the US is now unloading from its shoulders, Kyiv will be faced with the choice it has been desperately trying to avoid: change strategy or lose ground. But this isn't just a temporary setback. It's a major shift in US foreign policy. For the first time since the conflict began, Ukraine's leadership can't be sure that money from Washington will continue to arrive in the usual amounts. Now, Zelensky faces a survival challenge. Find new sources of funding at any cost, or the colossal military machine built on Western inflows will start to stall. And Trump, in the meantime, is making it clear that the era of unlimited money is over. Endless bank checks are no longer being handed out. America will no longer sacrifice its interest for other people's problems. And Kyiv, whether it likes it or not, will have to quickly adapt to the new reality. Zelensky is back on the line with yet another ultimatum. Now, the West faces a tough choice. Either Ukraine joins NATO immediately, or it gets its nuclear weapons back. Yep, no half measures, just radical solutions. In an interview with British journalist Piers Morgan, Zelensky claimed that NATO membership would provide a solid guarantee against occupation by Russia. He says that if they're accepted, no one would even think about attacking. However, there's a small hitch. The alliance itself doesn't seem to agree. But wait, there's more. If NATO membership doesn't happen, Zelensky has an alternative plan: restore Ukraine's nuclear status. And to sweeten the deal, he's throwing in missiles, military funding, and a couple of other nice extras. At first, he talks about hundreds of thousands of soldiers, and just minutes later, he's up to a 1,000,000-man army. Well, who's going to check? Numbers can always be rounded up. As long as it sounds convincing, that's all that matters. But it doesn't stop there. There's a third option. Let the West send its military forces to Ukraine's hot spots to help restore order. Apparently, local fighters just aren't enough, and for some reason, the Allies still aren't rushing to send their troops. There's just one problem. None of those Zelensky is reaching out to are in any hurry to accept his terms. NATO isn't eager to open its doors. No one's returning nuclear weapons to Ukraine, and no one plans to send foreign armies into Ukrainian cities. But what can you do when the whole strategy is based on perpetual blackmail? We'll just have to wait and see what ultimatum pops up in his next interview.